You're watching The Globe here on SABC News Channel. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, after 2 years of COVID-19 lockdown, South Africa is gradually getting back to normalcy. Most businesses have reported their doors are reopening and are now allowing employees a shift from remote working back to offices. But the challenge for business now is how to guard against a second pandemic of mental illness. According to the latest Mental State of the World report, more than a third or 35% of South African employees experience high levels of stress related to physical ill health such as headaches, nausea, sleeping, eating problems, etc. during lockdown.
2 years ago, on the morning of Friday, 27th of March 2020, South Africans woke up to a day one of a drastic pandemic-induced lockdown. A new normal of social and physical isolation and juggling remote working with supervising homeschooling and queuing for basic necessities. According to the report, South Africa topped the list as the country with the highest percentage of people who are either distressed or struggling. On the other side of the spectrum, populations are either enduring, managing, succeeding, or thriving. An assessment from a mental health expert, Professor Renata Skuman, warns that after close to 800 days of lockdown, navigating the aftermath of COVID-19 is one of the biggest business challenges of our time. She adds employees have had to continuously adapt to shifting versions of this new normal, with the mental health risks of isolation and remote working now replaced by new stress factors in the return to workplaces. She argues the mental health impact of the pandemic and lockdown was seen almost immediately, with the South African Depression and Anxiety Group SADC reporting that calls to their helpline doubled overnight at the beginning of lockdown to 1,200 per day, rising to over 2,200 daily by September of 2021. The report also showed that South Africa had the highest percentage, 36%, of people struggling or in mental distress, up 8 percentage points from 2020. Professor Skuman said while the lockdown had a negative impact on employees' mental health, there had also been positive lifestyle changes, and business should consider how to incorporate these in the post-COVID workplace.
And to speak more about this, we are joined now by Professor Renata Skuman, head of the MBA in Healthcare Leadership at Stellenbosch Business College. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. So these statistics that look at the number of people who've been affected by mental health, a third. Do you think that figure is accurate, or is it possible that it could be larger, given the fact that people are also not only not accustomed to speaking about mental health, but also there's very little understanding and, should I say, concise information about mental health in its actual form?
I absolutely agree with you, and we have to bear in mind that the Mental State of the World report was only conducted in 34 countries, all of them conducted countries that's internet enabled or supported. So there was only 8 English-speaking countries included, and only 8 in the African continent. Now, if you bear in mind it was an internet study, you had to be connected to be able to participate in the study. So the majority of the population might not have participated in it. The second thing, we must remember that South Africa also have additional vulnerabilities for mental health due to the high unemployment rate, low education, and then also we are a young population. And from the study, it was clear that the younger generation is affected way more severely than older people, obviously because of various factors, but one of them is that during lockdown, we neglected in-person social interactions for online social interactions. Now we need to navigate going back to work. And during lockdown, because you didn't commute maybe, or there was less commute, there was more time maybe to connect, even just with your close contacts. We now sit in a situation where there's again more commuting time. Our good habits such as exercise, sleep, and connecting are falling by the wayside. And there's also the uncertainty of people having to make plans with their children again. We don't know if you're going to be in a hybrid environment. Do you need to go to work every single day? So there's again a lot of uncertainty. And as human beings, we struggle with uncertainty.
But there's also the fact, I was reading just what some of the symptoms are of this new variant, is it Delcron, how it lists amongst it depression, mental fog, and often people don't realize that they're depressed until things come to a head or something, really jolts them into thinking there really is a problem. And if you think about those who are asymptomatic, who may have COVID-19 and don't know, the mental fog also can be easily dismissed as cold or flu, something that's very temporary. And I believe that long-term COVID symptoms are very, very deadly.
Yeah, I won't say brain fog necessarily is deadly, but it definitely reduces your functional ability at work, and people can't think clearly, they struggle to concentrate, and it causes a lot of frustration. So there's indeed an increase of, as you mentioned, anxiety, depression, cognitive symptoms that we see directly related to the infection, but then also related to the other things. Like we know that as the pandemic progressed, people were less and less good with negotiating boundaries, with when do I work, when do I switch off, because I can just work at any time, anywhere, and from home. So we neglected that, which is a risk factor then again for mental illness. The other thing is the stigma surrounding mental illness, and then also a lack of knowledge. So people might often just feel sad, or they might lose interest in their activities and hobbies and things that they used to enjoy. And they don't necessarily realize that they might be struggling with depression. So in a way, I think the pandemic had a good influence as well. Although the mental health illnesses were on the rise, people are more aware of their mental health. People are more aware of the conversation. And for sure, organizations are forced with what are we going to do with our employees. We need to take care of them. We need to support them. We need to reduce stigma. And we also are forced to look at reasonable accommodation for our employees.
Please explain to us this figure, what it means practically. I believe that South Africa has the lowest mental health quotient. What are we talking about here, and what can be done about it?
So when we look at the mental health quotient, it looked at different factors. It looked at wellness, it looked at emotional distress, it looked at the cognitive abilities. But it was really on a spectrum from languaging, which means you're really almost withering away, to just being neutral, to flourishing, where you really can have a fulfilling and productive life. Now, unfortunately, in South Africa, our score was roughly 45, where the best scoring nation, Venezuela, had a score of 91. But it counts down or boils down to a 15% difference. Now, once again, as mentioned, the study was very selective. It only looked at certain nations and only 8 in the African continent. So for sure, there's countries that look even worse than what South Africa is looking. What the study has highlighted, as I mentioned, that the youth is specifically vulnerable, and that might also make South Africa look worse because, as I mentioned, we're a young demographic country, but also the education that is lacking and the high unemployment rate. What they also specifically found in the study, that the decrease in the mental quotient was 8% in the year 20 to 2021, and then 3% thereafter. So it seems like we sort of like settled into the new normal during the lockdown. But what they linked then, the dire impact on the youth, was specifically the elevated screen times and connectivity, where they found that most of the participants spent up to 8-9 hours connected on devices and behind the screen. Now, the problem with that is that other healthy habits deteriorate. For example, having in-person conversations, exercise, and your sleeping habits can deteriorate. But there's also studies dating back to 2017, so even before the lockdown, that showed that excessive screen time have a negative impact on our ability to concentrate, on our mental health. It have elevated levels of irritability and so forth.
And I want to talk, I want to go back to the issue of a long COVID and what it really means. And I ask this because I actually know of a couple of people who've had, who suffer from long COVID, and a lot of it has been psychological. And this thing that we've had to contend with, the shifting variants or understandings of new normal. I mean, as it is now, we've had a relaxation of restrictions, but we're still being told at the same time that there is a fifth wave that is coming and that there is a new variant. Does that also contribute to people having a long-term psychological trauma or complications?
Absolutely. I think there's a few factors that we need to distinguish. A, the losses and the impact of the losses during COVID, the loss of health, the loss of loved ones, the loss of income and jobs. So that created a lot of mental distress that could lead to depression or anxiety disorders. We also then have the direct impact of the disease itself that could cause physical symptoms and mental health symptoms. We know specifically that sleep quality significantly deteriorate, and sleep impairment is again a risk factor for other mental health conditions. We also know the specific impact, as you mentioned, of brain fog, so difficulty to concentrate, people are forgetful, struggling to take decisions, which can almost look like ADHD, which is not ADHD, but you need to distinguish between it. And then also the direct consequence of being ill, which can cause a lot of anxiety. And even now, additional stress with vaccine. Should you vaccinate? Should you not vaccinate? A lot of uncertainty about that as well. And then the third reason that we see all of these symptoms has to do with lifestyle changes. Now, we do not understand long COVID completely as yet, whether it's immunological, whether it is a direct consequence of the virus, whether it's just complications of the physical health, which, and if you don't have physical health and you don't have employment health, it can obviously contribute into more emotional distress, but something is happening. And we also know that people that weren't taking good care of themselves prior to COVID will even be more likely to have long-term side effects. However, we also see perfectly healthy, active, fit people that struggles with long COVID. And it seems like long COVID is present in at least 30 to 40% of patients at 45 days. Now, it doesn't say it's going to be continuing beyond that, but luckily it's not the majority of people that struggle with very long COVID. But at least there's a period of a month to 3 that people can really struggle, even though the shortness of breath, the flu-like symptoms, the infection part of the symptoms has been relieved.
Okay, so let's talk about return to work strategies, which you spoke about, that companies or institutions will now be forced, as it were, to deal with the mental health of people. But I am curious about the obligatory nature of it. So we have to take care of the mental health of our employees because we have to. But there's the caring aspect of it, isn't it? Genuine effort that is sincere and really ensuring that your employees are indeed taken care of in terms of their mental health. How would you distinguish between the two in terms of strategies?
From a business imperative, for me, it's almost a given. It's a non-negotiable, because yes, it's the ethically correct thing to do. But sometimes the only way of convincing leaders is if you do the financial calculations for them. And we know from prior research that for every rand that you invest in mental health of your employees, previously, it was said that your return would be 1.6, but we now know that if you look at the quality of life and the cost saving in terms of employee turnover and productivity, etc., can be up to 8 times. So there's also a financial imperative that make business sense. But yes, there is a caring part. And you've most likely have come across about the whole thing about the Great Resignation, where especially younger people want to find meaning in their work. So if they don't have flexibility or if they don't have meaning in their life, they might just leave. So if we take care of our employees, if we have a healthy culture where we really address prophylactically mental health issues, we open the conversation, but we also create a flexible, supportive hybrid work environment, we are more likely also to retain talent. The other thing, if we look at flexibility, is that you reduce time that people might be stressed due to the commutes, for example, and they might have more time still to do the things that's good for them, like connecting with their family or to exercise. The one big challenge that businesses might have is really to change the mindset from measuring productivity according to the hours someone spent behind a computer or in the office on their seat and at their desk, but rather to start to look at measuring productivity by measuring output. How productive is someone? How effective is someone? And maybe to build in rewards. If you're really doing your job great in a short workday, why punish that person with having to stay 8 hours and sitting in peak hour traffic? The last thing that I think is crucial in terms of healthy organizations and a healthy environment is to have open communication, to have a trusting environment, to have regular feedback, both downward and upward, but also to make sure that you identify hotspots of conflict early and to address it so that work can really be a safe, pleasant place where people want to be, where they are engaged, where you don't lead them to develop burnout and other dire consequences in terms of mental health disorders.
Professor Schoeman, thank you so much for speaking to us. Really much appreciated. And she is speaking to us about the mental health aspect of COVID-19 as we highlight 2 years of COVID-19, not only South Africa, of course, the world. Now, when we come back, we'll take a look at the conflict in Ethiopia, the industry.